Welcome back to the Cam Show, Rogue Media Sports Network. We bring in our weekly Bruins guest, Matt Barry of the Bruins Benders podcast. The season is over. It's one of those years where we actually know the last day of the Bruins season, and it's not just the conclusion of the second round of the playoffs. Matt Barry, we talked about last week, some moves maybe there'll be some moving and shaking in this front office. There was the report from the Greg Hill show earlier this week that a resignation was coming on Wednesday. It is Thursday. Everyone's still in place. The Boston Bruins seem to be running this thing right back into 2025-26. Is that a good move?
No, I don't think it is. I don't love the way they've developed players. They have a really high draft pick. Sure, they're going to get a pretty good player there, but will they develop them? Are they going to try to make him Patrice Bergeron and some 200-foot player with defensive responsibilities? Or are they going to let the guy be a creative hockey player? I don't know. I mean, I just think that the Bruins have always been small family atmosphere. Keep it in the family. I didn't expect what I expected was Neely to step away or go to a consultant role, and Sweeney to bump up and Gold to bump up after him, something like that. Evidently, nothing's going to change in that way. They have a couple of prospects right now that are decent, and they have a little bit of a good feeling about, maybe cautiously optimistic. You need guys like Elias Lindholm and Jeremy Swayman, some of the regular core guys to play better. That's the number one thing. I mean, if they don't play better, you're screwed anyway, probably, or you're just not going to be very good. So I don't know. I don't think it's a great move. I mean, we always want the grass is always greener. We always want a new regime. And what does that look like? And no one really has an answer, but it's getting a little stale. And I think that this year, Don Sweeney is going to try like hell to make the playoffs again. I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that they could, if things go right. And that's going to be the target. It's not going to be tanking. It's not going to be being bad again and trying to develop young guys and roll with the punches. It's going to be, we're going to get this team back to playoff contention. And that's what the Jacobs family wants. So, but again, they've had 4 general managers in my lifetime. It's not like crazy. It's something they do every once in a while. So I'm not surprised, but I don't think it's a great move.
And the Jacobs family, they have spoken. They did that letter to the fans. They also did an exclusive with the Globe. And once again, showing that they really don't quite understand, still after all these years, they don't quite understand this city or this fan base or really this sport, I think is what we can conclude as well. And they had said, I don't understand why. Charlie said this. He said, I don't understand why fans want Cam Neely and Don Sweeney out. It's really,
yeah, it was funny.
Are you kidding? I think it's not just been this year, by the way, because it's something that we've complained, we as Bruins fans just generally kind of complain about the last couple of years when things were going well. There was still that underbelly of Bruins fans. It's like they have no farm system. They don't draft anybody. They get rid of these picks and they still don't get out of the second round. So there's a lot to be said for that. And there is a quote in here that I wanted to get to. This is with the Jim McBride interview, and Charlie Jacobs basically throws it on somebody else. That's what the Bruins love to do. They love throwing it on somebody else. And they said, I feel it was a little bit disorganized. There was a real lack of structure. You see your teams come through. They have a system. They have perhaps a fallback play. And Monty just didn't have the answers. And it's like, really? Because the Bruins won 33 games this season. The Blues, under Jim Montgomery, won 35. They're in the playoffs. And still, it is somebody else's fault. And Matt, you and I talked about this. I think we weren't against the Jim Montgomery fire, and clearly something needed to happen, right? And there was questions of what his play style was. And I think what came out and kind of came to the forefront was that there was just such a disconnect between general manager's office and head coach. But how infuriating is this that we're still blaming the coach? The last one before Jim Montgomery has already won a Stanley Cup. And now Jim Montgomery comes in. He's got this great turnaround with the Blues. It's like, when do we stop blaming the coaches that are not here? It's so tone deaf. I think we lost Matt there for a second. I think we lost him. But it's crazy to kind of expand on that point. Like it's always somebody else's fault. It's not Don Sweeney. It's not the ownership. It's got to be the coach. And still we go through this game. You know, it was Bruce Cassidy's fault because he was, alienating the younger players. He was too hard on them. And then he goes and he wins the Stanley friggin' Cup the first year. He's somewhere else. And oh yeah, that guy that bitched about it, Jake DeBrusk, he's somewhere else, having a career year in Vancouver, 28 goals, career high. And then it was Jim Montgomery's fault. And like I said, we weren't against that move. I was on here saying it needed to happen, but also we've got to take a long, hard look at this front office. Like Jim Montgomery can only deal with the roster that he's got in front of him, and that's on the front office. And then Jim Montgomery goes in to a team that was really just like the Bruins. Okay, they didn't have a ton of offensive skill. They didn't have this great pipeline of talent that was ready to come in. And here are the Blues. They were 8 points out of it with 20 games left, and they're in the postseason. They're a danger team in the playoffs. And yet I read these quotes and it's always somebody else's fault. And I agree with Matt. Like, I can't believe that we're just not making moves. I mean, I can because of the reason he gave. It's so incestual. It's so mom and pop, the Boston Bruins. And they'll point to, Steve Yzerman going to Detroit, and that hasn't necessarily worked out yet. And yet it's the same crap every time. So Matt Barry, I ask you, is it just getting old that they keep blaming somebody else?
Yeah, I mean, they're just passing the buck. I mean, look, I agree with Charlie Jacobs. I thought it was a mess in preseason. We talked about it in preseason. I mean, guys weren't playing that much. They were playing like guys who had no chance to make the team. Joey Abate and these guys were playing all sorts of minutes in the preseason. What are you doing? It almost seemed like that they were just sort of biding their time and not overextending themselves, and thought that they would just kind of ease into the season. They didn't need a lot of preseasoning and stuff. And then we heard that there were injuries, and Elias Lindholm said he had a back injury in August, and it was disjointed. And we said that. So I agree, Charlie, you're right. But that's not the reason for a complete meltdown. You can right the ship in about a month if you aren't organized in preseason. You can find a way. You have a bunch of veterans there. And Montgomery, we've talked about Montgomery. That was a whole colossal lame duck coach scenario. They didn't want to give him what he wanted. They didn't give him a lot of say. Like, they started to take away a lot of the say, I think, in the lineup structure and the roster moves. And then he became like hands in his pants guy, like just standing there behind the bench. Yeah. Like, body language sucked. Like, so we look at many things can be true. But at the bottom line is that this team wasn't built or didn't have enough. It was disorganized. The fact that the philosophy didn't match the personnel. And that was from the beginning. Like, get all these big, heavy guys when Montgomery wants to go north-south quickly. So you have a coach who coaches a different style than the personnel you brought in. So that's kind of where it started. So, yeah, you can vaguely say, yeah, it was Montgomery's fault, really. But some of it was Montgomery's fault, but there were circumstances that made it difficult.
Yeah. So. And there's 4 months between firing Jim Montgomery and the fire sale. 4 months. Like, again, to your point, like, it's not like you didn't have time to get this right. We weren't expecting a President's Trophy after firing Jim Montgomery, right. But there wasn't any reason. And this roster was not great, but you look at some of the other teams in the playoffs, especially St. Louis, and you're like, well, there's really no reason this team shouldn't have been there. Or, Montreal was last in December, and here they are in the postseason. It's just, to me, it's a hollow excuse. And who knows who the next sucker is? I mean, they've not told Joe Sacco, but
that's what it boils down to. I still think it's Jay Leach. I don't know if it'll be Sacco again for one more run, but I still think it's Jay Leach. Maybe Mike Sullivan, but it's someone in the family, so to speak.
Yeah.
Look, and they're not going to bring a guy with a different philosophy and all new ideas when they love to keep it all in house. Like, they're not going to bring in some guy from outside who has all these new innovative things and they don't like to construct the roster that way, they're not going to do that. They're going to get a guy who shares their views. Like, that's what it is.
And it is. It's sad. I'll admit I haven't gone really in depth in terms of the coaching search and who that's going to be. We've been focused on, who they're going to get in free agency and if they do that and who they're going to pick in the top 5 of the draft potentially. Although we got to wait that out tonight with the Flyers last game of the season. But you still got a pretty barren prospect pool. I know the Will Zellers thing looks good. He's a couple years away. He's just set the ECHL goal record. He's going to be at North Dakota next year. That's the guy you got in the along with Middlestadt in the Charlie Coyle trade from Colorado. But looking at the one guy really that they've brought up at the end of this season, that's Fabian Lysell, who still took a while. It took some time to get his feet underneath him, but really these last couple games, he's looked positive. And it's almost like they should have had him up before and playing in the lineup when they knew they were tanking this season.
You think? Yeah, you think? Instead of having these Johnny Beaches and those guys in there night after night doing nothing. Yeah, I would have put him in a month earlier probably. But you're seeing some nice things, and I am cautiously optimistic about Lysell now. When I was getting nervous before, so that's good. Patra. He's performed well in Providence. Like, I'm cautiously optimistic there.
Yeah.
Guys like Lowry has to be much better. Who's Nadinov? He scored a goal last game and looks okay at times, but he doesn't produce a lot. No. He's played over 80. He's played 85 or so NHL games and, has like 5 or 6 goals. Like, he doesn't produce a lot. There's a lot of flash and flair there, not a lot of substance. So I'd like to see a little bit more from him. Minton looks pretty good. I'd rather have Minton than Middlestadt. Let me put it that way. Because I'd rather run with him going forward. So, look, I think there's a little bit of there as far as the prospects are concerned. But they're going to need a winger. They still need to figure out the center thing, which, if they get a top 4 pick, top 3 pick, whatever it is, and get a really good center, you might not be ready next year, but you might be ready the year after. Then that might help you out. Get a winger who can score 25 goals to go on the second line. That'll help you out. But it's going to be an uphill climb. They need a right shot D. Hampus Lindholm, they all reports are that he's going to be healthy. They don't have a lot of concerns about the structure of his knee. That's great news because that would have been another alarming thing. So I think left side they're okay. Right side they need a second pair right shot D. I think Neil Pionk with Winnipeg just signed an extension or is going to today or tomorrow. So there's a guy I kind of liked. So look for the right shot D guy, maybe too, in the offseason. But look, I don't think it's a quick fix. Can they make the playoffs next year? I think maybe. Make a couple of shrewd moves. Guys play better to their ability. Swayman has a better year. There's not the mess of negotiations and locker room shit and the coach getting fired and all that. Maybe they do. But it's not a Stanley Cup contending team for a while.
One of the good things about being in the off season is you just don't have to hear Jeremy Swayman as much.
I know. Today was another one. Today, like I'm holding accountability, but boy, I'm going to take these lessons learned and I'm going to, for the hard times, I'm going to remember it. Jeremy, just stop the puck. Just stop the puck.
Honestly, bro. We don't need you to be making like these deep Facebook quotes, man.
Just fucking stop the puck.
And the good news is for Swayman, like if you do start stopping the puck again, then you're zany. Then you're just a goalie who's a little bit out there.
Yeah, and everybody loves you because you're a zany, kooky guy who saves a lot of pucks.
And you could be as much of a dick as you want. You could beat Dominic Hasek and Martin Brodeur. Like they weren't the most liked teammates in the world.
When you're not. Everybody hates your guts.
Right. Right.
So, that works.
I do want to ask about Fraser Minton a little bit because he's been nice. He's been impressive. Obviously, he did have a cup of coffee in the league with the Leafs before the trade. Do you like him in a larger role than Matthew Patra next year?
That could be. I mean, either they're the second or third line centers. I think flip flop. I think Patra will probably have every opportunity to do it to start because he has a little more experience and he had some really good experience with Providence. I think he's a little bit further along, so I think you'll see Patra maybe second line. But Minton as a third line center. I just don't know what you do with Casey Middlestadt. I would try like hell to see what you can get for him.
Trade him.
I just don't think he's necessary. I think he's much of the same. I'd move Zacha to wing or kick the tires on moving him too. I don't think he can come back next year, or I don't want to, with Zacha and Middlestadt both on the team.
Zacha, good contract.
Yeah,
good
great
contract to trade.
Yeah. Ability to have 50, 60 points. Put him on a third line. Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's some value there. I just don't know how much, but you know what? The makeup of my team, Pavel Zacha's not a great fit.
Yeah, especially what you're doing right now. Like you're not. Yeah. If you are a playoff team and Pavel Zacha's on your third line, you love it. In fact, 22-23, that's a great example.
Right.
The last thing, kind of, you had said it earlier. This team's not going to tank.
No.
Even if it's in their best interest, they're not going to do it. And there's certainly the argument of, Pasta's in his prime. You don't want to necessarily do that. You've got some decent pieces here. But you look at next year's draft, there's no generational talent in this draft, but there is next year. Okay. Yeah. That next Connor McDavid, Austin Matthews, Connor Bedard is there next year with Gavin McKenna. So what point next year, because we knew early on in this season, it wasn't going to go according to plan. I don't think we knew how bad it was going to be, but if it starts the same way next year, do you think Bruins fans are clamoring for a full on tank by Thanksgiving?
Yeah. I mean, like last place by Thanksgiving, then I think you consider it. You consider sending a couple more guys away. That only really happens, I think, if you have a couple of major injuries. If McAvoy's out, if Pasternak's out, then for extended periods, then I think you consider it then. I just don't think it's going to be considered unless they are fairly confident they have no chance to dig themselves out of a big hole. Because you saw even with this year, they kind of still thought they were kind of in it for a while when it was fool's gold. Yeah. So it's going to take a lot for them to tank or to try to tank or whatever you call it. But by American Thanksgiving, if they're in like last place, and Sweeney's really like floundering, he could probably try to go get McKenna.
I would love it, man. I would love it. And then they'll make Gavin McKenna into Charlie Coyle, and the rest is history.
That's great. Yeah, be defensively responsible. It'd be great.
Oh, it's the Bruin way, baby. That's just the way we do things around here. Oh, man. Anyway, Matt Barrie of the Bruins Benders podcast. He's getting a bit of a better sleep schedule now without the post games. They're over, but you guys are still dropping episodes, and you got even a new like after show coming in.
Yeah, we do. We have a Benders off here. We talk about everything else, a little humorous, a little bit showing our personality. That's through the ITR Plus subscription, $5 a month. You can subscribe. We have all sorts of content on there. And then on we had this morning, actually, our new episode with like a season wrap up kind of dropped this morning. It'll be on YouTube later today. And then we'll keep going weekly with the episodes. We might do some lives here and there and just try to keep it going through draft, because the draft lottery and draft are big deals now this year for the first time in a while. So that'll keep us going with some content. So, it was a good year for us. It was a really good year for us. But not a great year for a fan.
Coach fired, captain traded, team stinks. It's great for content. I don't mean to spoil it, but the Benders do give the Bruins an A+ on this season, just so you know when they give out the final grades.
Right. Yeah, out of the bag.
Yeah. Matt Barrie of the Bruins Benders podcast. Matt, we appreciate it. We'll talk to you soon.
Okay, Cam. Thanks so much.